5S is 10 years old. And it's actually kind of crazy to think that it really is that old. I mean, this was my first ever phone that I used on a cellular network. I got it in 5th grade in 2016. And yeah, I used this as my main phone for about a year and a half until I kind of broke it. You see, I went on a trip and I decided to go swimming, and I did not realize that my phone was in my pocket. And like any kid would do with their first iPhone who's kind of chronically online, I freaked out. But either way, I have a lot of memories with this iPhone 5S. And I want to give my full thoughts on how it's held up basically 10 years later. It's kind of insane to say that, but it's been 10 years. So let's get started with this video. I think the design is one aspect where the iPhone 5S really shines. It's really quite a stunning phone. You get glass at the top and the bottom and aluminum on the sides and also part of the back. The buttons are so clicky, which just makes it feel like a very premium phone in my opinion. It's such a classic design. I love it. It's also so nice to see that we have a headphone jack. The display gets somewhat bright, but it is an LCD, which means the viewing angles are not going to be the best, and it's also not going to be the brightest. Another thing you can see is that the display is very small, much smaller than most other phones. But yeah, this is kind of expected for such an old phone. Moving on to performance, we have an Apple A7 chip with 1 GB of RAM. I believe this was the first phone with 1 GB of RAM. And when I had this in 2016 to 2017, I thought this phone was extremely fast, and it was. I could do anything that I wanted. I could play any game that was around. And honestly, I wasn't too intensive of a user. I would mostly just be playing Geometry Dash, but still, I really did think this performance was really good, and it was. Now, in 2024, not only is it not updated to the latest software, I believe it is still on iOS 12, which is starting to get really old because we are now on iOS 18. And on iOS 12, the performance is not as good. You can't play any game you want. Instead, you can play some basic 2D games, but that's basically it. Moving on to the camera, we got an 8 megapixel camera on the back and a 1.2 megapixel camera on the front. It sounds pretty basic, and you'd be right, it is a very basic setup. It's almost identical to the iPhone 6's camera. So if you want to see the performance of that, I do have a video that I recently uploaded of the iPhone 6, so go check that out. But as a summary for the camera, it's very mediocre. It can take some okay shots. Actually, I took a couple of shots of leaves and some nature and stuff like that. If you go up close to it, it actually has a really nice background blur. And I like the fact that overall the colors can sometimes be okay in those scenarios. However, when you're in other lighting, when you're in low light, or if you're not in the most optimal lighting, it will completely suffer. Or if you have too much issues with in terms of the difference of lighting, let's just say that you're in somewhere that has a lot of shadows or has too much light, then it won't perform well either. It'll overexpose it or it will underexpose it. Anyways, so moving on to the final verdict, how does this hold up in 2024? Well, there are some things that it does do kind of well. For instance, I think, honestly, for a basic user, even though I did say that you can't play any game anymore, it can actually run some games alright, like 2D games. So I guess if you do want to give this to someone who is using this as their first phone, like a kid, or just someone who doesn't really need to use too many apps or anything like that, I would half recommend this, but I wouldn't fully recommend it. I kind of had the same thoughts with the iPhone 6, where basically it's not something you really want to use if you're using this for anything intensive. If you're getting this though for 10 to 20 bucks, which is usually what you find it for, it's not the worst phone in the world, and you can get much worse than this. So yeah, guys, that is my thoughts on the iPhone 5S. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.